In a world where conflicts between nations keep escalating, currency is no longer just a medium of exchange. It becomes a weapon, a shield, and an invisible pipeline through which resources, power, and fear are moved across borders. War and geopolitical tension deliver three shocks at once: an energy shock, a trade shock, and an expectations shock. And all three strike the core of money itself: inflation, growth, capital flows, and faith in policy. The European Central Bank has pointed out that after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, energy prices surged and remained highly volatile, pushing electricity costs upward and intensifying inflation pressures. When energy and transport grow more expensive, production costs spread like wildfire through the economy, into factories, logistics, and household bills. Central banks then get trapped between two spears: tighten policy to fight inflation, or ease policy to protect growth, even as each option carries political and financial consequences. And it is not only Ukraine. Disruptions at commercial choke points, like the Red Sea and the Suez Canal, raise shipping costs and magnify supply chain risk. UNCTAD has warned that the Red Sea-Suez disruption threatens the free movement of goods and the stability of global maritime networks. J.P. Morgan Research has estimated that these disruptions could add about 0.7 percentage points to global core goods inflation and around 0.3 percentage points to overall inflation in the first half of 2024 if higher shipping costs persist. For currency, inflation behaves like acid. It eats away purchasing power, corrodes trust, and often forces monetary policy to react in ways that intensify market volatility. But the deeper and uniquely modern layer of this era is the weaponization of the international financial system itself. The freezing of Russia's foreign exchange reserves after 2022 became a global signal. Even safe reserves can be neutralized by political decision. Brookings notes estimates of frozen Russian reserves around $280 billion, with many experts placing the figure between $300 and $330 billion. CFR describes how Russia's immobilized reserves are concentrated largely in Europe and how debates have intensified over whether and how those funds might be used. Once such a precedent exists, central banks and governments everywhere have a reason to rethink the architecture of safety: where reserves should sit, in what form, and how the risk of geopoliticization should be priced. Every empire, when it still stands, swears its money is a safe harbor and its promises will last forever. History, cold, patient, and brutally consistent, keeps proving otherwise. People go to sleep with full savings accounts and wake up to find the numbers turned to ash. From Rome to revolutionary France, from the American Civil War to modern Lebanon, the common denominator is not a lack of intelligence or morality. It is a very human mistake: treating money like bedrock. Money is not bedrock. Money is trust. And trust, stretched by ambition, war, crisis, or a sudden shock, can snap overnight. What is frightening is that collapse is not rare. Collapse is the rule. So the real question is not, can the system fail, but when it fails, what survives? Survivors are often not those who trust the most, but those who doubt the earliest. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. They understand that states and banks have incentives, constraints, temptations, and limits. The Byzantine Empire once held the solidus, a gold coin trusted widely across regions, almost a reserve currency of the medieval world. But the lesson people assumed had been learned from Rome's earlier debasement returned in a new costume: the dilution of precious metal, the mixing of cheaper alloys, the thinning of real value. At first, no one noticed because trust behaves like habit. It goes blind for a while. Then the crack appeared. The coin that anchored Mediterranean trade became political fiction. What survived was not decrees or promises, but real gold, land, and assets outside the reach of the printing press. The first timeless lesson is simple. Governments are repeatedly tempted to dilute money, and when they do, Real value flees to what cannot be counterfeited. Yet not every collapse begins with rulers tinkering with coinage. Sometimes history rolls the dice and drops an external shock. The Black Death, 1347 to 1351, devastated Europe, breaking trade and erasing communities. But the economy did more than mourn, it rearranged power. When a large share of the labor force disappears, labor becomes scarce. Survivors can demand higher wages. Land and assets become relatively abundant compared to people. Families with liquidity, silver, goods, or simply the ability to earn, suddenly gain the power to buy what once looked untouchable. A buyer's market rises from the ashes. The truth is uncomfortable but consistent. Crises tend to reward those with reserves and punish those without. That historical rotation becomes sharply visible when we look at COVID-19. Supply chain disruption and massive relief measures produced a widening split. Asset prices rose powerfully while many workers struggled to cover rent. This is not romantic analogy. It is a recurring pattern. Shocks flip the game board, and liquidity becomes the privilege that can buy the future. In January 2026, Reuters and the Financial Times reported gold trading in record territory around the mid-4600s per ounce, amid geopolitical tension and policy confidence concerns. One more living illustration of money fleeing toward perceived shelter when fear rises. Then comes Renaissance Florence, Europe's financial capital in the 1340s, home to banking dynasties such as the Bardi and Peruzzi. They lent heavily to monarchs, and defaults crushed them, ruining depositors and freezing trade. The lesson does not need poetry. Too big to fail is a lie as old as finance itself. Institutions exist to earn profits, not to guarantee your survival. When confidence leaves, dominoes fall fast. The modern echo is visible in the U.S. regional banking turmoil of 2023, when depositor flight and contagion risks forced official intervention and reminded everyone how fragile banks can become, especially when a large share of deposits are uninsured. The American Civil War turned paper money into a mass tragedy. Large-scale war demanded large-scale spending, and printing became the quickest tool. In the North, greenbacks. In the South, graybacks. As more paper flooded the economy, purchasing power weakened, trust wobbled, and living standards were eaten away by inflation. In the South, desperation led to extreme issuance. By the end, money was effectively dead. Paychecks worthless before they could be spent. Families carrying bags of bills that could barely buy bread. In those moments, what held value was land, food, gold, things so real they don't need persuasion. The point that shocks many Americans is that their own history contains a currency collapse, and protection came not from trusting paper, but from holding value the system could not inflate away. Revolutionary France, through the assignats, shows another road into the same abyss. A noble label, paper backed by confiscated property, could not save a reckless printing mechanism. When trust broke, farmers refused to sell food for paper. They demanded goods or silver. Bread riots returned. The revolution devoured itself. The winners were not those holding patriotic notes, but those holding food, gold, and property, things the state could not print overnight. The Asian financial crisis of 1997 sharpened the lesson to a blade because it struck the architecture of the international monetary system itself. Borrowing in foreign currency is placing your throat in someone else's rope. When domestic currencies collapsed, USD-denominated debts swelled instantly. Loans became unpayable. Capital reversed. Unemployment surged. Ordinary citizens suffered while powerful players hunted assets at fire sale prices. The video's phrase is accurate: debt in someone else's money. In a world where cross-border finance is increasingly entangled with geopolitics, that trap has not disappeared. It simply changes outfits. Lebanon is the modern version you don't need textbooks to imagine. People woke up to frozen deposits, restricted withdrawals, and a collapsing currency that turned lifetime savings into scraps. Multiple reports note the Lebanese pound lost more than 90% of its value after the crisis that began in 2019. Those who survived better were the ones who diversified abroad, held gold or property, or kept cash outside the banking system. The cruel core is this: money in the bank is not a treasure chest. It is a loan you have made to an institution that can, in crisis, delay or refuse repayment. Paper money can fail. Institutions can fall. Survivors are those who recognize fragility before the crack becomes visible. But if we stop at history, we miss the breadth of daily life. Today's world makes money, already built on trust, more sensitive, more volatile, and more openly shaped by power. This is precisely why gold returns like an ancient god of credibility, not because it is mystical, but because it carries less counterparty risk than bonds or foreign currency deposits. The ECB has noted that central bank gold buying has stayed at record levels and accelerated after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Reuters has also described sustained, heavy central bank buying and the role of geopolitics in gold demand. As tension rises, safe haven demand rises, and as safe haven demand rises, reserve composition and global capital flows shift. At the same time, the world has witnessed attempts, uneven and varying in scale, to reduce reliance on the US dollar in certain transactions, expand bilateral or multilateral settlement in local currencies, and build options outside traditional channels. Policy Center analysis has documented the push for greater use of national currencies in cross-border payments, including BRICS discussions, while ASEAN Plus 3 authorities have also explored expanding local currency transactions to reduce dependence on foreign currencies. The IMF adds a crucial nuance. Dominant currencies remain resilient, but there are signs of fragmentation in trade invoicing patterns along geopolitical lines. That matters because trade and finance generate the natural demand for a currency. If trade invoicing, energy settlement, or reserve choices diversify, the geography of currency demand shifts, slowly but meaningfully. War pushes people to seek refuge for value, not only in gold, but also in strong foreign currencies, real estate, and essential goods. It pushes firms to increase inventories, reroute sourcing, and rewrite contracts. It pushes states to raise defense and social spending, swell public debt, and trap central banks in a gray zone between price stability and systemic stability. In mid-January 2026, Reuters and the Financial Times reported gold printing fresh records in the mid-$4,600 per ounce amid geopolitical tension and policy confidence concerns, an immediate living expression of how fear of paper promises shows up in markets when the world tightens like a wire. Escalating conflict makes currency more sensitive because it raises the probability of three things at once: a cost shock, energy, shipping, goods; a trust shock, confidence in institutions, policy commitments, and the safety of reserves; and a fragmentation shock, trade, payments, and capital flows. In that environment, the old lessons of Byzantium, Florence, revolutionary France, and Lebanon are not folklore. They are a map. And that map says what survives is rarely a paper promise. It is more often hard to counterfeit value, gold, land, essential goods, diversification of counterparty risk, not concentrating everything in one bank, one currency, one legal jurisdiction, and, most importantly, the ability to create real value when others freeze, skills, productive capacity, and exchange networks. When money loses meaning, bread still must be baked, machines still must be repaired, goods still must be moved. History is not kind, but it is darkly fair. Those who can provide what people need tend, sooner or later, to stand back up. There is no single formula for every era, but there is one shared pulse. Collapse is both tragedy and opportunity, And the opportunity most often falls to those who prepared, those with liquidity, real assets, and real skill. If the world today is entering a more tense phase, the rule of money has not changed. The speed at which trust can evaporate has. And in the arena of old gods, war, debt, inflation, and power, the survivor is not the person who prays the system will remain solid forever, but the one who sees the system for what it is, a contract of trust with risk clauses and an expiration date. What then is money worth to you right now? Any analysis is only relative, so share your view.